I have a learning disability. I'm dyslexic. And when I was a kid, they didn't really know what dyslexia was. I mean, they were just beginning to understand it, but they didn't know how to treat it. They didn't know how to educate for it. So they stuck me in behavior problem schools, which basically meant I would get the living crap kicked out of me on a daily basis. I mean, just everything, just beaten. Come home crying. I had no friends. And this went on from like second grade all the way up through high school. It was tough. This isn't a woe is me story. But it has to start somewhere. And it starts there. See, I can't read. I mean, I can. But the way my brain works is very confusing. Let me explain. See, I skip chunks of information when I read. So, if there was a sentence that said the cat in the hat went to the store and bought groceries, I'd misread the most important part, which is and bought groceries. I'd only read the cat in the hat bought groceries, not went to the store. So I didn't like reading. Now I have tons of books and read all the time, but when I was a kid, I didn't like it. It bothered me. It felt like a chore. It felt like a punishment. And then my dad came home with a trunk one day. He didn't know what was in it. I know he got it from a site where he was working. And he said I could have what was ever in it. So we cracked it open. And there they were. Hundreds of Silver Age comic books. And the very first one I picked up was this. Amazing Spider-Man 129. It's one of my most prized possessions. I must have read it a few times with gloves on and took good care of it because it just seemed special. Now, frankly, it's worth a lot because it's the first appearance of Punisher, and Punisher's kind of a badass. I guess what I'm getting at is there's one thing about Spider-Man that I could always get to. I could be the guy in the mask. I didn't have to be anybody else. I could be whoever I wanted. See, I would go to school, get my butt kicked, come home, and pretend I was Spider-Man. Because he was put in a mask, and I could be Spider-Man. There's one name on here, and I think you guys might be able to guess where I'm going. But there's one name on here in all of these old Spider-Man books, and all of these Spider-Man books, essentially across the entire Marvel universe. And that's Stan Lee. See, without knowing it, Stan Lee taught me how to read. Because the bubbles in the comics allowed my brain to slow down. See, I would page through them and look at the art, and eventually I wanted to know the story. So I forced myself to read it, one bubble at a time. And I fell in love with reading. I fell in love with art. I fell in love with culture. Pop culture. This one. The one Stan Lee is more or less responsible for. See, everything we love right now is because of Stan Lee. Everything. At least for me, anyway. I was actually fortunate enough to meet him 3 times. Once in San Diego, twice in Chicago. I gotta back up for a minute. See, in 2005, I go to San Diego Comic-Con for the first time. I get to meet Stan Lee and get all my books signed, and he was super sweet and wonderful. But at the end of that, I got to go back into that line, and I ended up being the last person on that line. So I actually got some time with the man, the myth, the legend. And we chatted for 5 minutes, but for me, that was an eternity. That was a never, again, lifetime opportunity. And then he said, hey, I'm going to be at Wizard World in like 4 weeks. It's like, oh, I'll see you there. And he's like, I'll see you there, true believer. So I went back to Wizard World in Chicago, in Rosemont, Illinois. Got to meet him again. I was like, hey, Stan Lee, man, I met you at San Diego Comic-Con. You were wonderful. He's like, oh, I remember you and blah, blah, blah. He didn't. We know he didn't. Stan Lee meets 1 million people a day. But the fact that he said that meant the world to me. My inspiration, my teacher, my hero, and my friend said he remembered me. And while he might have, the chances are zilch. Then 10 years later, I'm an adult in my late 20s, early 30s. I'm at C2E2 in Chicago, Illinois. And I have to use the washroom. So I go in and it's early, no one's around, the washroom's still clean. I'm doing my business. I'm a nervous peer. Sorry, TMI, but this is important. In walks security. They go look around, check the stalls, they see me, pay no attention to me, thankfully. But they say, hey, coast is clear, come on in. And in walks Stan the Man Lee. And I'm at the urinal, just trying to not be nervous. Normally I'm a stall guy. Again, TMI, but it's relevant, I promise. Because this is my favorite Stan Lee moment ever. And he goes right up into the urinal next to me. And I'm sitting there terrified as a young adult male. Terrified to look anywhere left or right. Because Stan Lee is in the urinal next to me. And there's maybe a 2-foot divider. I could literally put my hand on his shoulder. I didn't. Business happens. We move on. He goes to wash his hands. Very cleanly that Stan Lee is. But I go up next to him. We're washing. We're soaping up. I'm soaping up longer than I should because I want to say something. I look over and I was like, hey, Stan Lee. And he goes, hey, true believer. And he walks out and he says, Excelsior. And that was it. Just those 2 words. True believer and Excelsior. One of my favorite stories of all time. How many people you know have peed next to Stan Lee? It's a good story. It's a true story. I'm going to leave you with this. He was an inspiration to me and to millions and millions of people around the world. There aren't many great writers in this world, but his stuff, his content, his creations will literally live on like the Greek gods he modeled them after. They are our modern day mythos. And it's Stan Lee. You can argue that Jack Kirby had things to do with it, and he did. And everybody else that worked with him did. It's 100% true. But Stan Lee, this all came from his brain. But the real kicker is, the real moral of the story is, always listen to your wife, because without her, we wouldn't have the Fantastic Four or Marvel. Like, comment, subscribe. See you guys tomorrow.